also really thrilled about this new series, How to Hug a Vampire. Now, here's the deal. When you first heard that we were doing a series, or maybe when Stevie was up here and you heard How to Hug a Vampire, you might have thought like, what on earth? What kind of church am I coming to, right? Because you're thinking like, what are they talking about? And then the subtitle here though is Loving the People Who Suck the Life Out of You. And all of a sudden you go, oh, right? Because we all know people like that, right? Like all of us have people in our lives that just drain the life right out of us. Some people, it's almost as if that's their spiritual gift, right? Like I have this gift to suck the life out of people. We all know people like that. And sometimes it's just periodically, someone just kind of goes through a season, maybe they're down and they're kind of life-sucking, Maybe for you, you get hangry. If you don't eat enough, like, I'm going to suck the life clean out of you until we can eat. So let's get some food. Maybe that's you. But then there's other people that are just perpetual vampires, right? They're just always sucking the life out of you. And in fact, we talked about that this week in staff. One of our staff members came to us in staff meeting and said, man, you will not believe the text message I got this week. And it was one of those group text messages. Have you ever been a part of one of those horrible group text messages, right? Like before you even look at your phone, you just feel like all the vibrations going off and you're like, what is happening? And you look and you've got like a short story in your messages app, right? And it's like you're like thumbing through the threads. Well, this thread had like 11 different people in it. And sometimes it was like a family text thread, right? So everyone in the family was in on this text thread. But like even extended family, have you ever been in a text thread and you're like, you have all the names and you just got like numbers for some people and you're like, who is this person and why are they texting me, right? Like my phone exists for my benefit, not yours, right? So if I don't have your number, I shouldn't have to read your texts, right? Well, they start blowing up and she came to us and she's like, man, so I'm super looking forward to Christmas. This is gonna be really fun with my family this year. And this was the text thread that she got from her family. The first person, no, I'm not getting you. We bleeped this out for the younger eyes. Anything, you all suck, Christmas is BS, right? Nothing says Merry Christmas like a text message like that, right? Like, Merry Christmas, I guess. And then I love this. It's like, I don't know who you are. Stop texting this number. There are kids on this text. This isn't even a joke. Like some people are like digitally, like trying to cover eyes and ears of children, right? And they all think this person, like maybe someone got a changed number, and they're in this thread. Has that ever happened? You're like, hey, this isn't who you think it is. And then I love this at the bottom. At the end, it's like, calm down, killer. The number belonged to one of your family members. We'll definitely make sure to take you off, right? It's like, I'm sorry, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're related to that dummy, right? Like, sorry, they're gonna be there, right? There's no avoiding that. We can choose our friends. We don't get to choose our family, right? So this person's just thinking like, man, Christmas sure is gonna be fun with that person, right? I don't know about you, but if I had a shopping list and I had all the family members I was shopping for, that name would get crossed off real fast. Like, that's how you feel about Christmas? Hey, I can save my budget a little bit of money, right? Like this is the kind of thing, and maybe you're looking at this going, man, that is crazy. And maybe some of you are sitting there and go, you don't know crazy. You haven't met my family yet. Like, this is tame compared to Christmas and Thanksgiving with my family. Like, they're all vampires. It is like one big Twilight show in my family, right? Like, it's just all relational vampires sucking the life out of each other. And we've all experienced this. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the 3 different types of relational vampires we're going to be talking about over the course of these next 3 weeks. First, we're going to talk about critical people. We all have critical people in our lives. We've all experienced people who are critical of us and think we need to do things differently or not do certain things. And, we've all experienced that. Or how about this one? We've all experienced controlling people, right? You ever had someone that's just real controlling about your life? Yeah? Some of you are married to that person. You know what I mean? Like right now you're doing everything you can not to look at that person. Like you're just telling yourself, look ahead, look ahead, look ahead. Like don't break eye contact. Listen, blink twice if you need help. Okay, we got you. Okay, it's fine, Or have you ever experienced this relational vampire? Like super needy people. There's always needy, right? Like it's always about them. They always make it about themselves. I'm now gonna look straight ahead, not make eye contact with people in the audience, right? Like we've all experienced this, right? Like we all know relational vampires, don't we? We know these people, right? To be honest, I've experienced some of these things like this week. As far as critical people, I kid you not, last Sunday, right? Last Sunday, I'm like talking up here, and I get done, I walk off the stage, and I come up to someone, and they walk up to me and they say, "You're not gonna believe how I showed up at this church this Sunday," which is always a great way to start a conversation. I'm like, I am so interested now, right? And they start going on, they're like, "I was someplace this morning, and I was talking to someone, and this person that was talking to me used to come to Icon several years ago when we were in Texas Old Town, and then they moved a good ways away, so they couldn't come here regularly, and it was a Sunday morning, they're talking to someone, and all of a sudden this person starts talking about Icon and starts talking really critically about this church and about me. And the person standing there is like, wait a minute, I know that church, and I know that guy. Like, that used to be my church. And this person was being critical, and it was this kind of awkward moment, and the person decided right then and there, like kind of their way to stick it to the man. They're like, I decided I'm coming to church today, right? And they just jumped in their car with their family, and they came straight here to Icon. You know what? We experience people, and if you think, man, people can be critical of a church, yes, absolutely, just like they can be critical of you. And as far as controlling people, there was this one time that we brought in this church consultant. And church consultants, really kind of any consultant, that's just a great gig if you can ever get into that. Basically, you pay a consultant to come in and tell you all the things you're doing wrong, and then they leave, right? Like, I want that job, right? Like, I can do that real well, right? So like this consultant came in, he's like, I'll do this pro bono, and he came in and met with our staff, and we're sitting in the conference room, and he goes up to the big whiteboard. He's got the marker, and he's like, okay, tell me what your mission is as a church. And my heart like fills with pride as I think about all of you. And I'm like, our mission is to help people become more like Jesus. And he goes up to the board and he's like, help you. And he kind of stops. And he turns around and he goes, no, that's not your mission. No, maybe that's how you accomplish your mission. But this is your mission. And he like writes it on the board. And I'm like, excuse me, are you new here? Like, who are you? You don't get to choose what our mission is, right? And he's like controlling the very mission of our church. And I realized for the rest of this meeting, like I'm just kind of checking out, right? Because I've put together the kind of person this is, and he's just going to control everything. And if I try to argue this, I'm like, so after that, I'm just like, that's good. Oh yeah, that is our mission. And then he like leaves, and I'm like, erase this off the board. This is not our mission. I know our mission, right? Like, we experience controlling people all the time. And are you kidding me? Needy people? You want to talk about needy people? Oh my gosh, there's this great story. So my wife, Kelly, talk about needy. Babe, no, come on, I'm kidding. No, I would never tell stories like that while she's here. So, that's a whole separate thing, right? But we all experience relational vampires in our lives, right? Like, the reason I tell you over the next 3 weeks, here's what we're going to be talking about, is I want you to take notes. Some of you are going, oh, I know I'm coming on that Sunday, right? Like, I'm inviting my mother-in-law on that Sunday. I'm inviting my brother on this Sunday. And some of you are like, well, I know where I'm going to be for the next 3 weeks, right? Like, and you're just going to bring everyone you can, because we all know people like this, right? Like, when you hear, like, how to hug a vampire, it's what? And then we talk about this, it's like, yes, absolutely. Because we all know these things. But here's the thing. Today, we're going to talk about a different kind of relational vampire. And this vampire, this is one of the most dangerous ones of all. Because the problem is it's hard to see. This vampire, like vampires of legend and lore and TV shows, can't be seen in the mirror. The reason for this is one of the most dangerous relational vampires there is you. It's me. It's every single one of us. As your pastor, allow me to lovingly tell all of you, you suck too. Like all of us. We all can be this way. You're welcome. I will do this all day long, right? Like I can do this, right? Because come on, we're all life-sucking sometimes. There are times and there are seasons that we can suck the life out of other people, and we have to realize it in us before we can address it in other people. And if you're angry that I said this, I'm sorry. This is what Jesus said. Not exactly. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But Jesus said, hey, you need to first look at yourself before you look at everyone else. This is the way he put it. Jesus said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take care of that speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? And I love that Jesus used this like exaggerated language here, right? Like, imagine this taking place. Imagine like two people on the construction site, right? And one guy's just, cutting wood and he's kind of zipping different wood. And like there's sawdust around and all of a sudden the wood breaks and like a part of the wood just stabs right in his eye, right? And he turns around, blood dripping down. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, you got a little something in your eye there, And he's like wiping the sawdust out of his eye. You get something in your eye and they're like, has anybody ever blown in your eye when you get like an eyelash? You're like, what is wrong with you? Don't blow in my eye. I don't know where that came from. But anyway, he's like, trying to get the speck out of the sawdust in his eye, all the while with this like piece of wood sticking out of his eye. It'd be ridiculous. And this is the language that Jesus uses when we look at other people first. He's saying it's ridiculous. Right after that, Jesus goes on, he says this, you hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Jesus is like, you take care of you first, then we can talk about everyone else. But before we get there, we must start here. And this word that Jesus uses, hypocrite, in the Greek, this has specific meaning. To the people of those days, there was an image, a picture that would have popped into everyone's mind when he said, you hypocrite. This word hypocrite right here, this in the Greek language, hypocrite, it's hypokrites, and it means a performing actor under a mask, like a theater actor. It was commonly used for actors on the Greek stage. So in Greek theater, how they would dress up is many times they just have a mask that they'd put over their face. And that was the very word that Jesus chooses to use when he says, you hypocrite. Take the plank out of your own eye first. Because we all do this. We all like to wear masks, don't we? Where we pretend that we've got it all together, that we've got it figured out, and it's everyone else that needs to fix things. Can I be honest for a moment? Can I, as your pastor, can I take my mask off a little bit and just be honest with you? In fact, last Sunday, the story I told you about someone being critical of this church and critical of me, do you know what my first reaction was? My first reaction when I heard that someone was being critical of us, it was to get on my knees and to pray for their soul and to pray. No, I wish. Because my first reaction was to get critical about that person, right? Like I got angry, I got defensive, and I started telling myself a story about kind of who that person was, the type of person that was. I instantly got critical of their criticalness. I was being judgmental about their judgmentalness. I don't even know if this is a word, but right? And we do this, don't we? When someone is critical of you, what is your first response usually? Is it not to be critical of them? Or is your initial reaction first to look inwardly and say, is there any truth in this? Is there anything in this that I actually need to hear right now? Well, I'll be honest, for me, last Sunday, my first reaction was to be defensive and to be critical about that person. And do you know what I spoke about last Sunday? Like, I kid you not, I was on this stage talking about our reaction needs to be love the people that are difficult to love. I talked about loving the people who we'd be most inclined to hate. And I talked about this, and then I walked off the stage and someone told me something, and my first reaction is to be critical. My first response is to be judgmental. And I wish that weren't the case, but I'm just taking the mask off and being honest. There are times that we can be critical too. There are times that we can be controlling of other people. There are times that we can be needy and look at our needs first instead of considering others' needs above our own. See, the problem is we can't see our true reflections in the mirror. We're the first relational vampire we need to deal with. Your biggest problem is the person you look at in the mirror every single morning when you wake up. That's the person that you need to address first. And do you know why we do this? Do you know why this is our tendency? You see, we have these natural leanings, these natural bents in every single one of us, and we tend to accuse others. When someone does something, our first reaction is to accuse them. But you know what we do when it's us? We tend to excuse ourselves. We accuse other people while we excuse ourselves. We say, well, listen, I've had a really rough day today. I kind of flew off the handle, but man, if they knew what my day's been like. I'm just really stressed out. Work is really tough right now. So my wife, she just needs to understand that I'm really stressed out right now. We excuse ourselves, but we accuse everyone else. See, we are the relational vampire that we need to address and fix first. And one antidote, one kind of cure, one thing, one tool that can help you with this, when your first reaction is to accuse others, one thing that can help you, and just write this down or log this in your memory because this will help you if you use it, is to assume the most gracious explanation. So when someone does something that offends you, that hurts you, when someone's critical of you or trying to be controlling of you, you tell yourself a story of the most gracious explanation you can imagine. Maybe that person that was being critical of us, maybe it was like some big game of telephone and someone said one thing and someone else said another thing and it kind of changed over time. And by the time it got to that person, they were really trying to look out for that person. Maybe they had heard some things that made them nervous and they were trying to be protective. So maybe it wasn't that person's fault. You see, I need to assume the most gracious explanation. When someone is critical of you, when someone is hurting you, you tell yourself a story. And you remind yourself that hurt people hurt people. So maybe that person hurting you is really hurting on the inside. And you tell yourself the most gracious story possible to explain that away, to understand that. That doesn't mean you dismiss it. That doesn't mean you ignore it. We'll talk in future weeks what you do with it. But where you start from is you start from this place of grace. And if we could do that, if those of us here in church today, those of us, many of you consider yourself followers of Jesus, if the church could get this right, it could make such a difference. But many times, how we respond, many times how I respond, many times how the church responds is wrong. You know what we tend to do? We tend to judge rather than love. Sometimes the church is known for kicking the wounded. When someone makes a mistake, when someone comes in the church and they've made these mistakes and they come in wounded, sometimes they end up getting beat up even more by the Christians instead of picking them up and loving them. Or sometimes we just stop caring. Something is in the news and man, we become this social justice warrior about that thing for 15 minutes, for a couple weeks. And then we just kind of forget. And life is busy and we just kind of stop caring. Or sometimes we just shoot first and ask questions later. We like to do that on Facebook a lot, right? Someone says something, it's like, I'm gonna tell you, and we like shoot first and then we seek to understand later. We don't get it why people get so offended and hurt. If the church led the way in this and began from a place of grace, said, I'm gonna tell myself the best, most gracious story possible, that's where I'm gonna begin. And when we don't, when we do these things, when this is our response first, when we accuse first, Jesus has a word for this. The early church had a word for this when they would talk about this, and the word is it's sin. And sin is something that sometimes, some churches really like to talk about it, some churches don't like to talk about it at all, and we need to understand that it's got this place that sin is in me, and sin is in you. And I love this definition of sin. And this is one definition that the early church, especially the New Testament, really grabbed hold of. And I want to just read this for you. It says, sin is primarily a terminal spiritual sickness rather than a state of guilt. A self-perpetuating illness which distorts the whole human being and energies, corrupting the image of God inherent in those who bear the human nature. Sin diminishes the divine likeness within them, disorients their understanding of the world as it truly is, and distracts a person from fulfilling his natural potential to join in union with God. And it distorts and disorients us when this sickness is in us. And it causes us to not see the divine image in every single one around us. It distorts our view, and we don't see the image of God, the Imago Dei, in humanity. That sickness is in me. That sickness is in you. It's in every single one of us when we accuse first. When we excuse ourselves, we've got all the ammunition in the world against everyone else. the cure for this sickness. A guy by the name of Paul talks about a great antidote to this sickness. And Paul is someone that knows a lot about this. In his kind of, in a sense, previous life, his name was Saul. And Saul was someone who persecuted the followers of Jesus. He was given authority to travel around the area and arrest those that followed Jesus. His life's mission was to stop the church. And then Saul met Jesus. His eyes were open. He realized who Jesus was, and his life was forever changed. His name was changed to Paul. And then he had a new mission: to rid the world of that sickness of sin. Paul started churches around the known world. And he wrote letters to those churches, helping them through difficult moments. And in one letter, I love the way he puts this. You can see the kind of pastor's heart in this. He cares. He loves these people. He pens this letter and he says this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And what Paul's not saying here is he's not saying ignore self-care, don't take care of yourself. He's not saying that. He's saying, listen, it's not about pursuing you first at the expense of other people. In fact, I love the way the late Eugene Peterson put it in his paraphrase. Eugene Peterson was a Bible scholar who worked to put the Bible into normal English and kind of spoken vernacular. And he put this passage this way. He says, if you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other, love each other, and be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. I love this. Forget yourself long enough to lend a helping hand. See, this is the antidote to that sin that's in us, where we want to accuse others. So we forget about ourselves just long enough to help someone else out. Instead of reacting and responding, maybe we listen. So coming up in a few days, on Thanksgiving, where some of you will be surrounded by relational vampires, may you remember this. When your brother starts talking about politics again, and you find yourself saying, oh, so this is how we're going to spend Thanksgiving. Awesome. May you seek to understand. Maybe this Thanksgiving, you just listen. Maybe you don't fight back and try to prove yourself right and that other person wrong. Maybe the day after that, where some of you go out shopping in the craziness that is Black Friday, and there are relational vampires everywhere. Maybe you offer a little bit of grace to the person at the cash register. Maybe they are a little short with you, but you begin with a place of grace. You find small ways that you can help and love and serve the people around you. May we be a church. May we be people that do everything we can to kill that relational vampire inside of every single one of us. Because the best way to do that, in fact, the only way to do that, to kill the relational vampire inside of you, we have to learn to hug the vampire next to you. So we acknowledge that we can be like this. We acknowledge that, yes, I'm a vampire too. I'm going to learn somehow how to hug the vampire that's next to me. Might be sitting there and you might be going, sure, Dan, that sounds great, but how do you hug a vampire that's next to you? And to answer that question, you'll have to come back next week as we all learn to hug those vampires around us. Amen.